a man who speaks the truth with a voice that's oh so clear. A watchman for the Lord is he. He speaks of God and prophecy. Newswatch magazine. Listen to this man. Newswatch magazine. Exposing Satan's plans. Newswatch magazine. He loves America. Newswatch magazine. Not afraid to tell it all. Newswatch magazine.
Newswatch magazine presents the analysis of world news in the light of Bible prophecy with David J. Smith.
Hello, everyone. Certainly another beautiful day in Texas. In the Bible, the New Testament, it actually showed from time to time that history lessons were given by various ones of the apostles who taught, such as Stephen. And then there's whole books on history in the Old Testament, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Nehemiah and Ezra, and so on. And so historical settings and God giving us news of that and an understanding of it must have been important to Him and to us, so that we can realize that we have a God that can intervene in our affairs from time to time as needed. Today I want to give you a history lesson on some of the items that are happening in the world today, and especially to the wonderful United States of America that God had blessed so wonderfully and bountifully in the past. And because we as a nation have turned our back upon Him as a whole, we've kicked God out of the schools, we've kicked Him out of the young people's lives, so we see a nation of young people that are now not very religious. They're not cognizant of the fact that there is a God, that there is an Israel, that it existed, and that we can know about it, and that we can understand that that God has given us great hope. So we have as a whole, not every individual of course, but as a whole, a nation that is hopeless, a nation that cannot find its correct path, that has no national destiny, because of events that happened many, many years ago. So today I would like to discuss Revelation chapter 13, verse 1 and 2 to begin with. John said that he stood upon the sand of the sea and he saw a beast rise up out of the sea. A beast is a government. So there was to come a world government, and of course the time setting, if you want to turn there at your own time and your own leisure. In Revelation 17, 12 to 14, it shows that this beast with the 10 crowns, the 10 horns and 10 crowns is going to fight Jesus Christ. So the time setting is just before the return of Jesus Christ as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But then in verse 2, the very last part of that verse, it tells us where the power for this world government is coming from. The dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. And when you look in Revelation 12:9, you see the dragon is nothing more than Satan called the devil. So it's an invisible, unseen factor in world events that human beings don't like to acknowledge even exists. Then when you drop down to verse 4, the latter part of this verse, it says, "Who is like unto this beast," or this government? "Who is able to make war with him?" Now this implies several things. Number one, it implies that nobody on earth is going to have the military equipment to stand up against this rising world government. At a certain point, it will have total control. At a certain point, it will totally disarm every person on the face of the earth, and no one will have the military except themselves. Whether it's handguns, machine guns, assault rifles, sporting guns, it doesn't matter what it is. No one is going to be able to stand against it and make war with it which shows that they will be in total control. But then in verse 7, and this is the verse that very few people like to even acknowledge is in the pages of the Bible, because it says it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Not only will he make war with individual nations who does not want to be a part of this New World Order, but of course the saints of God, the ones with the Holy Spirit of God inside of his or her mind. Satan is the one who is giving rise, so that means Satan is the one who is going to try to destroy everything that God stands for. He does not want individuals with his spirit whose destiny, according to Revelation 5, verse 9 and 10, is to become kings and priests. And then Revelation 20, verse 4, to become judges. In other words, human beings' destiny is to replace the unseen spirit world, Satan and 1/3 of the angels that rebelled. They're currently ruling planet Earth, unseen. They use human agents. But the time will come when God will send his Son, Jesus Christ, to this earth. He will become King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He will resurrect those that are to receive salvation as first fruits. They will be the first ones to trust in Jesus Christ. It will not be by sight, but it'll be by faith. Faith in the shed blood of Jesus. Therefore, they will be given the right to rule. But how could war be made upon the saints before Jesus comes? After all, they're God's people. God has shown in many, many scriptures in the Bible that he's going to protect some, but some will be absent from that protection. They will be martyred. Some will lose their life to wash their robes white in the blood of the Lamb. They will need to suffer so that they can learn obedience, because for some reason they won't learn it in easy times. We've lived in relative peace over the last 200 years in the United States of America. There has been no outside threat other than when the Illuminati founded international communism to be the seen enemy of the Western world. So let's investigate for a moment just a few of these words that Jesus Christ made, the statements in Revelation, where he said that this power that would rise would bear rule over every nation. Nobody would be able to stand up to it. Nobody would have the military capable of overthrowing it. It will become absolute. And it will require Jesus Christ to intervene in world affairs in order to overthrow and get the grip of this absolute dictatorial power off the back of the human race. In May of 1919, in Dusseldorf, Germany, the Allied forces obtained a copy of what was called the Communist Rules for Revolution. 84 years later, they're nearly complete. They've nearly succeeded in every single area in which they discussed their rules for revolution. They would infiltrate the United States of America. They would take over the book-producing industry. They would gather all the editorial pages of the newspapers to themselves. They would take over radio, and then later television came along, the mass media to reach out to the peoples of the world. They said that they would corrupt the young people, and it specifically was the United States, but this was true in every nation. It happened in England, it happened in Australia and Canada, it's happened all around the world. They said that they would get the young people away from religion. And the communists later said, give me 2 generations of your young people without God in the public schools, we'll have your nation. We've seen since 1962, 42 years, where there has been no God, no Bible in the school. Step by step, they've dismantled everything religiously in public in America. And they're wanting to eliminate tax-exempt status for churches today, so they'll be just like a business and be able to be taxed into oblivion. They said that they wanted to make the young men superficial. There would be no ruggedness anymore. In other words, they would eliminate heroism. No one would stand up for principles anymore to maintain the freedom of their nation. Then they said they would have to get control of all means of publicity, which I mentioned to begin with. They would get the minds of the people off of their government so that they could infiltrate and take over without the population even realizing what was happening. They said they would escalate sports in the eyes of people. They would introduce sexy books. Pornography would be running wild. What do we see everywhere today? We see the complete breakdown of Christian principles and the morals that once ruled this nation, all because their plan was introduced and it's worked. They said that through various nonsensical arguments, they would destroy the old moral values of the nation of honesty, sobriety, self-restraint. In other words, at one time where it was an absolute shame for a young woman to ever become pregnant, it was a shame, even into the latter part of the 1950s, for two couples, a boy and a girl, to even be caught having sexual relations. Today it's so prevalent that 50% of all children born in America are without one of the parents in the home, the father. They said that they wanted to destroy the pledged word so that it would mean nothing anymore. And then the thing that I want to discuss in depth today, they said that they wanted to create circumstances that would cause the registration of all firearms. And it would be on some pretext. Now, it would not be the truth, but it would be a pretext. And since they control the media, whatever the media said, the people would eventually believe it, because, as Hitler said, if you tell a lie long enough and big enough, everybody will believe it. And so it is, the media is attacking the Second Amendment. They said that they wanted to create circumstances to register all firearms in America with a long-term view of confiscating every single weapon and leave the population absolutely helpless, so that no one could stop them when they march in with their armies from foreign countries, probably the United Nations, Russia, China. Every one of these rules is nearly complete in the United States today. How close are we to the confiscation of guns in America? We can't set dates, but we do know that back in the early 1990s, at the 29 Palm Marine Base in California, they put a survey out, and the very last question was, if the President of the United States ordered all guns confiscated and a group or private individuals would not turn over their guns, would the military, in other words, the Marines, go door to door to collect them, and would they fire upon the citizens of America in order to obtain those guns from them? Are these things for real? Is our government programming the minds of every American to lay down their arms when the time comes? We'll see. In the Bristol Herald Courier in Tennessee, Friday, June 4th, 2004, page 5A, was this big headline: Mexico seeks closer ties with Russian military. Why in the world would Mexico seek ties with the Russian military? That was directly from the Associated Press. I don't make these things up. Right there it is for anybody to see and read. President Vicente Fox is a socialist, always has been. He already has very close communications and ties with Cuba, Fidel Castro, China, and now Russia. To be exact, truckers that go down into the free trade area into Mexico to pick up loads and bring them back to the United States report that Communist Chinese troops in full uniform can be seen everywhere, and they're not even trying to hide it anymore. And they call our office and tell us. There is a book out that describes the silent movement of Chinese communist troops into Mexico, very close to the American border. Its title is Silent Invasion. Reminds me of the movie Red Dawn from years ago, where it showed under the soft underbelly of the United States, foreign troops from Cuba, Nicaragua, Central and South America came in through the soft underbelly of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California and took over the western part of the United States. What if this knowledge became available to the public and a cry came out for protection by our government? Ted Koppel is very famous for being the commentator on Nightline. This is an ABC program. But on April 7th, 2004, he had some very interesting guests. They were former Ronald Reagan officials, Edwin Meese III, and then Kenneth Duberstein. Then he had former Bill Clinton officials, Sally Katzen, an author by the name of James Mann. And then he had former Bush official Richard Clark. The subject matter that they discussed that night was the Armageddon plan. In the discussion, Ted Koppel imagined an attack that decimated Washington, D.C. It destroyed the United States Congress. Then he said, and I'm quoting, "Aren't we left for at least the foreseeable future with some kind of martial law anyway?" End of quote. One of his guests, Duberstein, agreed with Koppel by saying, quote, "You have to suspend rights," end of quote. Then Ted Koppel came back and he said, quote, "And during that period then, and given the sense of panic that is inevitable under circumstances like this, the executive branch of government takes on extraordinary powers, doesn't it?" End of quote. Richard Clark of the former Bush administration piped up and said, quote, "I think in any war where Washington was destroyed, inevitably there would be a period of, for the lack of a better term, something like martial law. The key here is, though, that plans are to call for going back to the normal three-branch system as rapidly as possible." End of quote. History tells us any time that martial law has been called, except for one time after the Civil War in the United States, martial law was never abandoned. It became a dictatorship. The Nazis, Russians, Chinese, every time, it never fails. Koppel reacted to Clark's ideas by suggesting that there's a new leadership in Washington and they've come up with a new idea, and this is martial law. If something were to happen. No, that's not a new idea. The federal government, as far back as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, has been so infiltrated that they're on the verge of creating horrible circumstances that will ensure martial law with the loss of all of our constitutionally guaranteed rights. That is the only way that Revelation 13:4 and Revelation 13:7 could ever occur in the United States of America. Most Americans don't realize the tremendous assault that's been taken upon our Second Amendment rights to bear arms. In a trial against a private citizen from Texas, the federal government stated its purpose was not to allow any citizen to own a gun of any kind, and any citizen. Only the National Guard in each state and then the federal government's military could even have guns. This is the way they want to interpret the Second Amendment. And that leaves every American with their gun registered will be confiscated, and America could no longer defend itself. Therefore, whatever form of government they instituted in this country, they would have the right to say how to treat its population. This would leave the population totally helpless to resist what is called tyranny, as our founding fathers had told us. That was the reason why they placed the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights. Remember, I'm only giving you a history lesson today. I'm not telling you to do anything with it, only to educate you as to how Bible prophecy can come to pass. They use the Swiss as an example of every able-bodied male from age 16 to 60 to train in a proper handling of guns. This was our founding fathers, because the Swiss had done so since they became a nation in 1291 AD. They're the only nation on the face of the earth that has neither had civil war or a foreign army march onto its territory and conquer it. They have had a militia system where every person starting at age 16 was required by law to keep guns and ammunition stored in their own private homes to protect against tyranny. They don't even have a president. They're broken down into 26 states, as we call them today. The Swiss have never been invaded. They've never been subjugated since 1291 AD. But the socialist, communist, secret society members, such as the Skull and Bones, are working for world government. They know that if they're ever to achieve it, they must disarm the American people or they'll never succeed. That's what they're working for, to disarm the American population. They're working overtime with our senators and our representatives who are being manipulated by panic situations so that in some way, at some time, they will eliminate the constitutional rights to have a gun to protect yourself. You know, it's very strange, though, but the news media try to make people believe that guns kill people. When you lay a gun down, it can't do a thing. Criminals kill people because criminals do not obey the law. So, gun control is really about controlling law-abiding citizens. It's about disarming law-abiding citizens in the face of those who would do them harm. Criminals will have guns. They will get them on the black market. They do in every country in the world. Japan is the most gun-free country in the world, but they have their underground. They have their Japanese mafia with guns. It's only the population, the general population, that does not have guns. Burglaries that occur while the victims are at home are much higher in countries such as England, that has a total ban on all guns, than they are in the United States of America. At least so far. Australia is the same way. Out of the top 10 industrialized nations in the world, Australia does not allow anybody to own a gun, not even a handgun, not any type of gun. They have confiscated all guns. It's the number one crime-rated country in the world, in the industrialized world. Britain, who confiscated all guns, none is allowed. They are the second most crime-ridden society in the world of the industrialized nations. And how strange it is now that they're trying to take away from the United States of America, which was not even listed in the top 10 industrialized nations, to be violent per population, that is. Way back before any of our time, there was a testimony before the Congress of the United States by Union General Rufus Saxon. He reported that in the state of South Carolina, this is after the Civil War had already ended, and with the end of the Civil War, and with every slave being made free, they were now a citizen in good standing of the United States. And yet the state of South Carolina was confiscating all guns from the black population. So what did he say when he stood up before Congress? He said there's no free man who does not carry a gun as required and given the right to do so in the Second Amendment can call themselves free. Any person, no matter who they are, if they're of legal age, can bear arms and keep a gun in their home to protect the family and their property as called for by the Constitution of the United States. General Saxon charged that such disarmament would subject individuals to the severest oppression by people who oppose them, and therefore they would have no way to protect themselves at all. So the 14th Amendment came into being. The 14th Amendment came into being so that they could guarantee that no state would infringe upon the basic constitutional liberties of the right to keep and to bear arms, to protect themselves and to protect their families and their property should they own it. Mr. John Salzer, who happened to be a professor at Tougaloo College and an NAACP organizer in the early 1960s, he wrote that the black community needed to have guns to protect themselves against others in their own community that were becoming lawless. He said also that they needed to be able to bear guns because of racist individuals in America. And those racist individuals could cause bodily harm to them. And so that no one should be limited in the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. Then the former New York City prosecuting attorney, David Koppel, wrote a book called The Samurai and the Mountie and the Cowboy. In this book, he said, only if the government only has guns, only the people that the government cares about will be protected. He went on to show that in America, black communities have often been denied all the protection of the police department. Therefore, they must have their own guns to be a free citizen in the United States of America. In 1994, President Bill Clinton attempted to push through a nationwide program in which police would be empowered to conduct gun sweeps throughout housing projects, and one of those was in Chicago, Illinois. We have to remember this was done without search warrants. They were looking for illegal firearms, but there was no search warrants whatsoever. The gun ban lobby has been behind the power of the government, the courts, the media, and they have behind them also college professors. They all want to confiscate guns. Why? Why is it only the personal, private citizen of America and a few of our legislators understand the Second Amendment? Could it be exactly what the communists said they would do? They would infiltrate in secret into the government of the United States. They would create circumstances to register all firearms. Then the long-term program would be eventually to confiscate them from every American. The loss of our gun rights will affect every single American, regardless of race, regardless of what class, rich, middle class, poor, or regardless of which political party. It does not matter. It will affect every single American, just like it did in Russia, just like it did in Nazi Germany. The gun ban lobby can succeed only if it divides American against American. Only if it can divide black against white, man against woman, the young people against the older generation, their parents. Only with a divided nation will it get our minds off our constitutional rights and the guarantees that has made this country great. If the Second Amendment can be snatched away from us, That's one of the parts of the Bill of Rights. It won't be long till every single one of the Bill of Rights will be gone. You can't infringe on not one of them, and yet our federal government in Washington, D.C. is doing exactly that. There is a march toward gun abolition in America. That was one of the goals of the Illuminati, to abolish all guns. There's laws that have been passed in certain states. One of those is California. It's the most progressive of all other states in gun confiscation and registration. They passed a law in which they said that they had to have safety locks on guns. If a gun was in a home, it had to be hidden away high up somewhere so that young people could not find it and so they could not be hurt by it. There was an incident that brought national notoriety. When a husband went to work one day, the wife had to have the brakes fixed on the automobile. They had 4 children, a 2-year-old boy, 6-year-old boy, 11 and 13-year-old girls. So the 13-year-old girl was going to watch over the kids while the mother was gone for about an hour to get the brakes checked. Suddenly she heard a sound in another room. She heard this sound and she went to see what it was, and it was a man carrying a gun. She ran. He shot her. He wounded her very badly, and it took her several years to be able to get over the wound. But after she was down, he went into the bedroom of the 2-year-old and the 6-year-old boy, shot him at point blank range and killed them. The 11-year-old daughter saw what was happening and ran. She couldn't dial 911 because everybody knows that once you dial 911, they ask you so many questions, the crime's over before anyone can respond. And an hour to an hour and a half later, the police finally show up. So that's a scam. And so here was a family decimated all because of a law. When the father was talked to about this particular incident, he said, I was afraid to let my children know where the gun was because it's mandatory 7-year prison sentence for anybody that allows their children to find a loaded gun in the house. And if anybody's injured by it, it could be longer. So out of fear of a law, he could not protect his family. He couldn't train his children how to use a gun to protect themselves. And so there was death and tragedy over it. There was a professor, John Lott, Yale economist, who wrote a book called More Guns, Less Crime. He discussed on the Sean Hannity radio show on WABC this particular incident that happened in California. Professor Lott argued that the case revealed the fallacy of this so-called safe storage law. By forcing people to keep their guns unloaded and out of the reach of the children, the laws prevent both the children and the adults from using firearms to defend themselves when they desperately need that defense. Criminal penalties on gun laws of the gun laws and on the owners. If the children are injured or injure someone else by using a gun, as I mentioned, is 7 years. Could be more. But this young girl who escaped and saw 2 of her brothers killed and her sister wounded and took her years to recuperate, could have saved them. But the law prevented it. By some estimates, Americans use firearms successfully to defend themselves against criminals more than 3 million times in a year. Now, these incidents are very rarely reported in the news media because it just does not make good copy. It doesn't get the viewership and the ratings so they can charge the advertisers. So the truth is never really known. Major news organizations show a clear bias in favor of gun control. Why is that true? Because the media at the very top, I'm not talking about just your local reporter or maybe the guy that sits behind the camera and reads a script that is going in front of him, in front of the camera. And that's all he does, reads it. He can't tell the truth, but he has to read exactly what the editors of the program and the management have approved. There was a study made by the Media Research Center that was released in January of 2000 that showed that those who protected themselves by the use of a gun was so many more times than that has ever been reported or even thought about. And therefore the American people doesn't even know how effective it is to brandish a gun to protect your family. It showed that opposing gun laws, the Americans 10-1. They want nothing but the Second Amendment to the Constitution. But that's not what you hear on all the talk shows. When you have the liberals coming on talking about how someone got killed in the ghetto. But you know, when 3 teenagers out of 17 million over a 3-year period brandish a gun and shoot somebody, that's hardly an epidemic. It's hardly an epidemic at all. And yet the news media has been told, don't even report on the killings in the Hispanic and black neighborhoods where drug dealers and so on are killing one another, up to 17 per day in the major cities. It's not news, it's routine. But when you put all of these killings together over the drugs, alcohol, gang, turf wars, it's not fair to put them in with the rest of the American society and then say, see, Americans are the most violent nation on the face of the earth. We need to take away their guns. But that's exactly what they're doing. A man by the name of Thomas Jefferson, that all of us have heard of as one of the founding fathers, he said, where the press is free and every man able to read, people will be safe. That is not always the case anymore, because he didn't realize that there was going to be a day when the fourth estate in America, the news media, would be taken over by the enemies of America. And they would only report that which they deemed necessary to brainwash the people into accepting their program of gun registration and eventual total disarmament of the people. Thomas Jefferson also warned that the press sometimes may in the future align itself with special interest. And if it does, woe be to the republic. He was correct. He was very correct. It's undeniable that most journalists hold left of center views. They've been interviewed. They've said so. What does left mean versus right? Left is socialist communist. Right is constitutional republic. It means the Constitution in which we were given. Every state was guaranteed to be given a republican form of government, and that had within it the Bill of Rights. You see, it is a God-given right for us to have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to readdress grievances against the federal government, the right to bear arms. It is a God-given, and no government should ever be able to take it away. There was a Roper Center forum that revealed that 89% of all journalists voted for Bill Clinton in 1992. Bill Clinton and Hillary were outright communist. So who does that tell you they're voting for? Then you compare that to 43% of the vote that Bill Clinton received overall from the American people. The journalists 2-1 voted for a socialist. Only 4% of the journalists surveyed identified themselves as Republicans, and only 2% said they were conservatives. So what does that tell us? Journalists are clearly leftists, socialists, communists. They're going to use their forum in order to brainwash the American people into accepting their program for confiscation of guns. But then you can't blame the journalist because he only reads the script. It's the management that decides how the network or the newspapers are to spin an issue before the American people. Ordinary journalists have little opportunity to tell the truth, their own personal views. We were told that way back in the early part of the 19th and the 20th century by journalists themselves. They said if you were to tell the truth, you'd be out looking for a job within 24 hours. You have to do exactly what top management says. That's why the people with the big money come in and buy it up, because they are socialists. They want to rule the world, a corporate world government. Liberal news organizations are no different, not just conservatives, but liberals either. Political bias comes from the top. The rank and file reporters just simply do their job, read their script. Therefore, the anti-bias media comes from the management. It's the senior officials, the managers of these multi-billion-dollar conglomerates that keep merging so that eventually only one or two or three corporations will own all the media in the United States, and every one of them will be liberal. Why do we know that they are the ones who control everything? Because they said they would place pornography out in the media so that the young people would get their mind off government, off God, off religion. And so what do we see when you go to the movie theaters? Nudity, swearing, cursing, which was unheard of even into the early 1950s. Oh, people used profanity. Sure they did. But not like today. They use language today like it's what they learned in the first grade spelling class, when it's just not the way the Christian America once was. Liberal politicians are another favorite scapegoat because they're the ones that are running for office. But when you stop and think about it, these politicians are the ones who have pressure placed upon them from above, someone who seems to be larger than even the political party that they're a part of. And it forces them to go along in conforming with the promotion of gun control. It was President George Herbert Walker Bush back in 1989 who banned the import of assault weapons. He promoted the view that Americans should only be allowed to own weapons suitable for sporting purposes. That's exactly what Great Britain did. Now you can't even have guns for sporting purposes unless you leave them in the club locked up along with the ammunition. That's what Australia did. And now their sporting guns are locked up. It was Governor Ronald Reagan back in 1967 that signed the Mulford Act. It prohibited carrying of firearms in public or even in a vehicle. This was the law that has been passed in Washington, D.C. right now. You can't carry a gun, a concealed gun. You can't carry one in your automobile. In Washington, D.C. is the largest murder rate of any city per population in America. There are many people who have watched young men come up and kill tourists and other people stopped at stop signs or red lights just for the fun of watching them die. They can't defend themselves. They have no gun. Can't carry it in their car. Can't carry it on their person. They're helpless. They don't have bulletproof windows. This is America, and this is what the communists are trying to get so that they can claim America is a violent nation. The law was aimed at stopping the Black Panthers back there in 1967, but it affected every single gun owner in California. 24 years after that particular law was signed, Ronald Reagan was still pushing gun control. He said that he supported the Brady Bill on March 28th, 1991, in a speech. He said that he urged Congress to pass it without further delay. Well, the Brady Law only tries to register every single gun that we have so that they will know exactly where to go when the day comes for confiscation. So that Revelation 13, verse 4 and verse 7 can become reality. Jesus had even told us in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, that they would persecute Christians. This is all going to be a part of the persecution when they take away your right to bear arms, to protect your family, your property, and make it illegal to use a gun against anyone, even an intruder. One of the most aggressive gun laws, gun control advocates today, is Republican Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. He's from New York City. His administration filed a lawsuit against 26 gun manufacturers in June of 2000. In March of 2000, New York City Police Commissioner Howard Safire, presumably at the mayor's encouragement, put forth a nationwide plan for gun licensing and would also require gun owners to bring in their weapons once a year for so-called safety inspections. But the real purpose of the inspection that Safire finally admitted under pressure was to keep tabs on the guns, where they were, so they could monitor whether they had been sold or whether they were retained by the same people. They wanted to know where every gun was. Well, you know, this is exactly what they did in Britain first, what they did in Australia. Australia now has the highest level of crime of any industrialized country in the world. Britain is second. The United States and our Second Amendment right to bear arms, we're not even listed in the top 10 industrial nations with the most violence. Another Republican, New York State Governor George Pataki, on August 10th, 2000, signed into law, according to the New York Times, what they call the strictest gun control in the nation. It was a radical program. It mandated trigger locks, background checks at every gun show where somebody could buy a gun. Then what they call ballistic fingerprinting. Every gun, when it was manufactured, the manufacturer had to shoot it and see what the ballistics was, the fingerprint of the bullet, so they could trace any bullet that was ever fired back to where that gun went. It also raised the legal age to be able to buy a gun to 21, and it imposed a ban on all assault weapons. And assault weapons are not what most people think they are. It posed a ban on the sale or the possession of any assault weapon, and it was punishable by 7 years in prison, just like California. This was something, according to the governor of the state of New York, that needed to be a model for the rest of the nation. And he hoped that it would become a model. George W. Bush became president. This was brought to his attention as if he didn't already know it. He said he was going to watch the effectiveness of it, and it drew a very positive response from him. No wonder he allows legislation to continue, and he never vetoes one law to further restrict gun control in America. Journalist William Safire, whose articles appear all over the United States in newspapers, asked Richard Nixon way back in 1969 what he thought about gun control. Nixon's reply, guns are an abomination. Nixon went on to confess, quote, free from fear of gun owners' retaliation at the polls, he favored making handguns illegal and requiring licenses for hunting rifles, end of quote. So the only reason why Richard Nixon didn't come out against it, he was afraid he would lose at the poll because he knew the American people had a right to bear arms and they knew the Second Amendment still existed. So he soft-pedaled it. But today's gun control promoters seem to share the view that gun rights are no longer to be, just like Richard Nixon. There's an ongoing case that I mentioned in my introductory statements about a man in Texas. This particular man in Texas, a Dr. Emerson, he was having a battle in the courts over a divorce. His wife went to get a restraining order against him from coming close to the premises. He had owned a gun for many, many years. He purchased it. He had all the legal documents. He was legal. But he didn't know a little law that had been passed in the previous few years. That law said that if you are under a restraining order, you cannot own a gun. You cannot carry a gun. And so he was arrested, put in jail, went to trial, convicted. He appealed it. And so a man by the name of William Matea, who just happened to be the Justice Department attorney, dropped a bombshell revealing the government in Washington, D.C.'s true position on gun rights. Right in the court trial. And it so startled the judge that he questioned the attorney to make sure he understood what that man was saying on behalf of the federal government in Washington, D.C. And so Judge William L. Garwood sought clarification because here's exactly what Matea said. In today's terms, the Second Amendment means the National Guard only can bear arms. Any arms. So Judge Garwood sought clarification of what he was saying. I'm quoting right from the trial. You're saying that the Second Amendment is consistent with a position that you can take away guns from the public? Asked the judge. You can restrict ownership of rifles, pistols, shotguns from the people? Is that the position of the United States? End of quote. Matea's answer, yes. So the judge continued to probe. He wanted to know what is going on here. Whatever happened to the Second Amendment of the right of the people to bear arms? He said, and I quote, is it the position of the United States that persons who are not in the National Guard are afforded no protections under the Second Amendment? End of quote. Matea's answer to the judge, exactly. Dr. Emerson's case is now before the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. There has not been a ruling yet. But the government of the United States is behind it, wanting to get a ruling that only the National Guard can carry arms and no private citizen. They want the courts to set a legal precedence so that your guns can be confiscated, so they can take your gun. And if they can take one amendment to the Constitution away from us, they can take a second, they can take a third, they can take a fourth. That's what has been argued. And we know it's true. So what is the Illuminati's goal and what is part of their work today? To disarm America, to prepare to place us into an all-powerful world government so that we can't be anything but slaves at the hands of the taskmasters just like ancient Israel was to the Egyptians. But there's been an ongoing debate over the meaning of the Second Amendment, yet forces beyond our shores in Europe may be the ultimate ones to carry out the final say-so as to whether we have the right by our own Constitution to bear arms. Year by year, our government, because of treaties with the United Nations, because of treaties with NATO and the Southeast Asian Organization, is ceding or giving up our national sovereignty to international courts and global regulatory bodies. Americans may soon find that foreign bureaucrats have more influence in defining our right to carry an arm than our founding fathers who gave us the Constitution. For instance, the United Nations. We're a member of it. It actively promotes and coordinates efforts to ban or severely restrict firearms all over the world, every nation. At a United Nations conference in Cairo, Egypt in 1995, the Japanese government stepped forward and proposed a formula. They said that it would be a common strategy for the effective control of firearms on a global level. The United Nations moved very aggressively in that direction to implement it. One 1998 resolution by the United Nations panel of governmental experts on small arms. This is a report to the Secretary General on measures to regulate firearms. They recommended, among other things, that no person be allowed to own more than one gun. This is only one step. But you see, step by step, little by little, they're making in-runs around the Constitution. And there's no one left in America to stand up and say, this is not right. The Constitution was given to us. It's the supreme law of the land. Get rid of anyone who dares to change the Constitution that will affect our freedom. None of our congressmen will do it. They're pressured by the left in Washington, D.C., by the Ron Dellums, the Teddy Kennedys, the Senator Clintons, all the rest of the communists in Washington, the most vocal, the ones who prepare the laws and look for sponsors to take little by little all of our rights away from us. To the extent that such measures are adopted globally, there will become very intense pressure upon the United States to conform. It's already happened in Britain. It's already happened in Australia. It's already happening in the European Economic Community or the Common Market. No matter what the Constitution says, they're going to put such pressure upon the United States that we will eventually conform. So what it amounts to today is, in our history lesson, we stand at a crossroads today. For the first time since our Constitution was drafted, the number one major component of the Bill of Rights, the right to keep and bear arms, to protect us, our property, and to protect us from federal government tyranny, is in danger of being eliminated. Then there would be no protection for the people whatsoever anymore. Jack Anderson, who happened to be a columnist, and he wrote a book called Inside the NRA, National Rifle Association, said there is a lamentable streak of violence in the American character. He said that so that Americans would pay attention and so that he could propagandize them that we are a violent people. He said that a lawless streak, a tendency to carry our freedoms to the extreme and flirt with chaos. I grew up in the 1950s, graduated from high school in 1959. There was no chaos in America. There was no danger from guns. Everybody owned them. My dad owned 3. A German rifle he brought home from World War II, a German Luger, and another one. We all were taught how to use them, how to aim them, how to clean them, how to take care of them properly. There was no chaos until the communists began to take over. And they started the civil rights movements. And so Dr. Martin Luther King, who was sponsored by 60 Communist Front organizations, and a Georgia newspaper man took a picture of him sitting at Mount Eagle, Tennessee, with the head of the Communist Party USA, secretary to the Communist Party USA, and a William Z. Foster, right in the middle of all 3, learning how to agitate, use Molotov cocktails, how to use inflammatory speech to create riots in America. This is when it all began. It didn't work at that time. America had a stabilizing force. They owned guns to protect themselves. The Second Amendment said they could do it. Violence is not an American way of life. It's just not that way. But why would the government of the United States, in a trial, in a court case, over something as insignificant as a man getting a divorce and a restraining order said you can't carry a gun, why would they carry that to such extremes to go to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to try to get a favorable ruling? In September of 1941, German SS troops, assisted by Ukrainian militiamen, gunned down 34,000 people at a place called Babi Yar. This was in World War II. When asked later, why didn't you, some of the survivors, stand up and try to defend yourself? They said it's easy to defend your men, your women, and your children if you have a method. But when you've been disarmed and they have submachine guns, there's nothing you can do. But even the few desperate individuals and attempts during that period of time of World War II saw that it was futile. To try to strike back only served as a reminder to them that there is a difference between resistance when you have an opportunity and submission. It all depended upon who had the possession of the arms. When you have no guns to fight back with, you die if you resist. And so, in World War II, millions were slaughtered. As citizens of the Soviet Union, the victims at Babi Yar were not even allowed to keep and bear arms of any kind. So Jack Anderson, in his view that strict gun controls would be good for America, failed to even mention how Stalin's regime enforced gun confiscation. No one could arm themselves from tyranny. He didn't mention the Nazi occupiers. The first thing they did was to confiscate all guns so that there would be no uprising. So why is the government of the United States so interested in this case? They must get a ruling so they can strip Americans of every gun. Otherwise, they cannot set up martial law. A dictatorship so they can merge us into an all-powerful one-world government. Have you ever heard of death by government? There was a book written called Death by Government. It was written way back in 1994. And it showed many, many things. that were happening in the world at that time. Mr. Rummels is the one who wrote the book. He counted only unarmed civilians that were murdered in cold blood. He didn't even enter into his statistics that he put in that book those that were killed in war, who were a part of a legitimate military operation. He also put in his book the statistics of those who were killed by forced mass starvation. And very shockingly, Mr. Rummel found that the number of murders by government during the 20th century, from the year 1900 to 1987, when he wrote the book, was 4 times the number of people that were killed in all the wars in combat. Nearly 170 million people were killed by their own government, and in every case it was after they confiscated the guns. Is there any reason why our forefathers wrote the Second Amendment to the Constitution? Remember, Revelation 13:4 says that nobody's going to be able to stand against this government that rises. J. Edgar Hoover wrote a book, Masters of Deceit, showing that the international communist movement, they were masters of deceit. They would say one thing while they were frantically doing something else in order to enslave us, to weaken every institution that we had in this country, de-Christianize us, make us amoral, so that we would have no morals, no Christian virtue anymore. And we would be an easy target for the pluckings. Those individuals who are killed in the United States of America every year by handguns, rifles, even when you add up the gang wars, the drug wars in the inner city, it pales into insignificance when you figure that the government of Russia killed a minimum of 61 million people after they disarmed them, or 35 million minimum in communist China, only after they were disarmed. And then, of course, Tito's regime in Yugoslavia can't be overlooked. Smaller nation, but over 1 million were killed there, only after he disarmed them. Why are they wanting to disarm America? So they can eliminate all of those individuals that will not fit themselves into the New World Order, that will not be a part of world government. There is a time coming in the near future when there's going to be another Holocaust in the world. Not just Jews, gypsies, and other undesirable classes of Adolf Hitler's Germany. It's going to be Christians. It's going to be people in America, whether they're Christian or not, they call themselves patriots. Because Revelation 13:4, they will not be able to stand up against the government. And Revelation 7 shows they're going to bear rule over every nation, language, and tongue. And they're going to persecute and make war against the saints. That is, all those that have not been accounted worthy to escape all the things that are coming. Individuals have done studies on murders within countries, whether they're dictatorships, claim to be republics, whether they're fascist governments, it does not matter. 2 such men are Aaron Zellman and Richard W. Stevens. They wrote a book called Death by Gun Control. And they showed very conclusively that gun control laws cleared the way for at least 7 major genocides between 1915 and 1980. At least 7 in 7 different countries. They started out by registering guns. Then they had an effort to which they would confiscate guns. Then the dictatorship was set up. And then the genocide began. Anyone that they did not appreciate that would be a part of the New World Order, they felt was an enemy of the state, was liquidated. Not just Adolf Hitler, not just the Lenins, the Stalins, the Mao Zedongs, but in other countries also, even in Turkey. And so there is a global effort now to take away guns from every single American. So is there a culture of violence in the United States? Not according to the statistics. Because in this book by these gentlemen, they even went as far back as the Wild Wild West, as we see in all the movie theaters and all the Western shows. And it looks like they were nothing but thugs and gunslingers. They weren't. To be exact, they took the 5 rowdiest cities in the Old West where the cattle drives went to, and there was an average of 2 murders per year in all 5 cities combined. That threw right out the window this book that said we are a country of violence, and our history has been violent. And so the former attorney in New York City, David Koppel, went along with another man named Clayton Kramer. They put out a paper in 1944. The summary of that was that America is the most peaceful nation in the world. They proved it from the statistics of every single country, that death and violence came only to those who welcomed it by joining gangs, by becoming drug dealers. And then once in a while, those who are hooked on drugs, and they start killing their own families. They went so far as to show that even in the high schools, in the latter part, as they put out a supplement to it, showing that now a full 25 to 30% of all students in schools are now on Ritalin. Ritalin is supposed to calm you down because you may be fidgety. You know, most boys are fidgety. They're the most trouble in a class, but it's normal. You take away their aggressive nature in going out and playing ball and wanting to win, their competitiveness. Then all of a sudden you've got what they used to call, when I was growing up, sissies. They changed them from boys to girls. God made males and He made females and He made them different. But in today's society, in order to accept the possibility of subjugation into an all-powerful world government and the willingness to give up their guns, so there will be no more heroes to stand up against the New World Order, they're putting all the males that are fidgety, that like to shoot spit wads in school, or get them a rubber band and shoot them, whatever, pull a ponytail, stick a girl's pigtail in an inkwell or whatever. You know, little silly things like that. They say that they have an attention deficit disorder. They made it up out of the blue. I mean, every kid in America has that, if they're called males, and they have testosterone. So they've got all these kids on Ritalin and other Prozac-type drugs. Side effects are, I want to commit suicide. I want to kill somebody. Who can I murder today? So they keep them on them for long periods of time, so they'll sit there docilely. Doesn't bother anyone until all of a sudden they decide they need to have a front page story somewhere to prove that the white American society is filled with violence and guns are the enemy. So they take somebody off their Ritalin. They cut them off from their supply, and all of a sudden they want to commit suicide. They want to shoot somebody. So they go home and they find a gun and they come to school. In every single case where there's been shooters in the schools since 1995, that's when they began to blow this out of proportion. Why? Because from 1990 through 1995, the killing in schools and the violence among teenagers had dropped by 75%, according to the United States government figures. So they had to create a problem, get them all on Ritalin. Then when they need somebody to be violent, take it away from them. It works. They had their headlines. The Million Mom Marches on Washington, D.C. to get rid of the guns. Yes, all of these things are happening in America right now. I've mentioned that there were individuals who were behind it. But who are some of these people? How did it start? How can you get 1 million mothers to march to ban guns and take them away? Apparently they don't even know what is behind it, but the communists do. The communists said a long time ago, we need dupes. Oh, these people will never become communists. But if we can only create a plan where they think they're doing society good, then they'll be our useful idiots. That's their language, not mine. I'm just quoting it. So with an all-out assault on the Second Amendment, sometimes it does cross someone's mind. Who's behind this assault? Because this is too large of a subject for it to be just one person. So I'm going to single in from right now the finishing part of my message to just one little incident to show you how they work. It's called feminism. Just about all historians in America agree that the advent of feminism began in 1963 when a woman by the name of Betty Friedan published her best-selling book entitled The Feminine Mystique. She claimed that her marriage had become a comfortable concentration camp. As a direct result, in 1966, she founded the National Organization of Women, abbreviated NOW. She became its first president. Friedan said that she wanted to break free from the routine of being a housewife, a childbearer, and having to keep the home. She wanted to be an example for other women to help them to be free. However, her story was very misleading in her book, as her true motivations were not told. In 1999, Smith College professor David Horowitz published a book called Betty Friedan and the Making of the Feminine Mystique. It went into the great details of Friedan's background that only a very small circle of hardcore leftists, as in communist, her friends, knew about her. It revealed that she had never been a normal housewife. She'd never been a normal anything. When she entered college, her maiden name was Betty Goldstein. She was already at that time, when she entered college, a hardline Stalinist communist. She was very active in communist movements in America. Even though she was Jewish, she supported Stalin's 1939 non-aggression pact with Hitler. Orders were then sent out from Moscow and Stalin to all communist parties of the world that they were to treat Hitler as a friend. Betty Friedan was among the loyal who obeyed Stalin. Goldstein later married a fellow leftist, as in communist, Carl Friedan. She devoted the remainder of her life to the cause of Marxist revolution. She spent her married years as a professional propagandist for the left Communist Party. Carl Frieden later noted that his wife had his maid to do all the housework. The maid took care of all the children because Betty was seldom ever a wife and absolutely never a mother. So Betty Friedan had always been a women's libber because she was a communist. She grew up with communist indoctrination that a woman was a slave in the household. She had to be liberated. She held firmly to those Marxist doctrines that women were to be equal with men. They were to have equal pay, equal opportunity. They were to be equal so that they could have equal sex with anybody they wanted at any time, and marriage restricted that. This teaching was a standard feature of the Communist Manifesto that was written in 1848. It was nothing more than a rehash of Adam Weishaupt, who founded the Illuminati May 1st, 1776 works. This was brought over to America and advocated by Frances Wright in 1829, way before the Communist Manifesto was ever even published. She delivered her message to the communists who were there in New York City. Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, in writing in the Communist Manifesto, shocked the world by calling for the abolition of marriage. Well, that was already a part of the Illuminati's program of 1776. They just put it down in writing. They viewed marriage as an oppressive institution which needed to be destroyed. Now, what has this got to do with gun control? I hope we'll get there, but our time is up for the day. They wrote, and I'm quoting, "What is the present family based upon? It's based upon capitalism, the acquisition of private property. It insists in all of its meanings only for it exists in all of its meanings only for the bourgeoisie." That means the middle class. "And will vanish when capitalism vanishes. So when they destroy capitalism, marriage will also be destroyed." He went on to say, "Are you accusing us that we want to end the exploitation by parents of their children? We confess to that crime. They wanted to liberate children so they wouldn't have to obey their parents." They went on to say the bourgeoisie, middle-class men in this case, sees in his wife nothing but an instrument of production. In other words, reproducing children. The communists were never taught that love entered into a family unit, that you loved your person, and the ultimate fulfillment and the showing of that love was the reproduction of children. They knew nothing about love, and she didn't. And so she went head over heels into the communist movement of trying to free women. Marx and Engels argued for free love for all women, in which everyone would have sexual access to everyone else. It's called group sex. We know that it burst onto the scene back in the 60s and 70s when the Vietnamese War was going on because communism made its greatest strides in America. This was nothing but a rehash of the order of the Illuminati's plan that was divulged in 1829 in New York by Frances Wright when she came over from England. The program was free love, emancipation of women from the home, equal rights for women, and equal opportunity. And women today are rushing to have equal rights, equal opportunity, and destroying the homes. And the divorce rate goes sky high because there is competition within the family to be equal. Little to be people today realize that they're falling for the communist plan to destroy the family unit. But what does this have to do with the Second Amendment? The right to bear and keep arms. We'll see. A deep hatred towards marriage and family was instilled in every Marxist mind. During the 1920s, it was frowned upon among communists in America to have any children at all. After all, family responsibilities might dampen an individual's revolutionary zeal. Therefore, the good communists did not want to be viewed as reactionary and have children. It would hold them back from their cause and their purpose of overthrowing the American system. But as the years raced by, there was no American revolution for communism. So many communists became frustrated and disillusioned with their situation and their status that they had found themselves, and they began to have families. One such man was David Horowitz, a Marxist communist. He wrote in his autobiography by the name of Radical Son that his parents were part of that generation. Horowitz recalled that his parents always being on guard against something that they referred to as male chauvinism. That was in the 1940s. We didn't hear it openly until the 1960s and 70s. This was a communist buzz phrase that was now to be entered into the mainstream as communist doctrine for the American people, without them even knowing where it was coming from. Male chauvinism. Horowitz was taught to view men as oppressors of women and women as the victims. This is what the communists were taught. So people, the communists that is, began to have what they term progressive ideas about the family and having children, that it caused havoc with marriages. So these communists who now were disillusioned saw that their marriages were in shambles. Men and women became at odds with each other because the man was the oppressor and the wife was the victim every time, whether it was true or not. That was the way they viewed it. It had to be that way. That was historical Marxism that had to be hoisted upon the shoulders of the world. So men had to be softened in America by using the phrase male chauvinism every time, so that men would lose their masculinity and be afraid to stand up and be the head of the family the way God said to. That's why the Bible says, and women shall rule over them, because the communists introduced male chauvinism and entered it into the mainstream. It caused resentment by women whom their husbands showed no affection to, no emotions when they were giving birth to children. They were taught not to. After all, men and women are equal. And men have no feelings along that way, or less feelings. And so the women are supposed to be strong and powerful and not have emotions either. When that is not the case at all, God built it. Men different from women. The men were supposed to be strong, protectors of the family. The women were supposed to be the ones who would rear the children, who would have compassion, would have mercy, could have peace of mind in taking care of the family unit. They weren't supposed to have the competitive nature to try to take all the jobs away from their husbands. But they were injected with this communist approach. So the same sort of progressive ideas underlay Betty Friedan's 1963 best-selling book, The Feminine Mystique. The genie of this progressive thought was now unleashed to work its black magic in the United States of America, in the mainstream American families who once was called Christian. And they understood the man was to be the head of the wife, and the wife was to be in subjection unto her husband as unto the Lord. But the husband was supposed to be a loving husband, not a dictator, the way the communists showed the women to be over the men. Many women have fallen for this progressive lie, is now having rude awakenings. There was a freelance writer by the name of Kay Eberling. She made enemies of many of the communist left-wingers when she wrote an article entitled The Failure of Feminism. It appeared November 19th, 1990 in Newsweek magazine. She wrote, quote, "To me, feminism has backfired against women. In 1973, I left what could have been a perfectly good marriage, taking with me a child in diapers, a 10-year-old Plymouth, and Volume 1, Number 1 of the Ms. magazine, which is a communist publication. I was convinced I could make it on my own. I didn't need a man. In the last 15 years, my ex is married. He gets older. His women stay in their 20s. Meanwhile, I've stayed unattached, unmarried. He drives a BMW. I ride buses." So this equality, she found out, was not working. Eberling had accepted the feminist teaching that men were responsible, easily replaceable, they were disposable in every way, and perhaps not even necessary at all. But in practice, it turned out to be women who were left out in the cold once they had turned their back upon the laws of God concerning marriage. They no longer had the man to protect them, the man to provide for them. For nearly all women, feminism proved to be a disaster. But for the left-wing communists who invented this movement, their sufferings is irrelevant. They don't care if the women of America are suffering as long as the movement goes on. Why? Because the communists have a saying, a slogan, worse is better. If the women have a worse state in life, they will accept revolution. So the more depressed, the more alienated and unhappy people feel, the more susceptible they are for recruitment into the revolutionary cause. For that reason, many leftist communists deliberately promote policies that they know will cause misery, suffering, and chaos. They know it. But of course, they're on Satan's side. They just don't know there's this unseen spirit behind them. David Horowitz gave an example in his book, Radical Son. And incidentally, David Horowitz turned 100% against all communism. And he has been exposing it since 1980 for what it is. He called a discussion with 1960s activist Tom Hayden. He recalled it in his book. Now, Tom Hayden is the one who married Hanoi Jane Fonda, communist, who also has made millions in the film industry. He recalled that the Chicago 7, and he's talking directly to one person, this man revealed his true motive for inciting riots during the 1968 Democratic Convention. Tom Hayden said, quote, "If people's heads got cracked by police, it radicalized them. The trick was to maneuver the idealistic and unsuspecting into situations that would achieve the result." End of quote. So here were people rioting, making America look like it was a violent city when it was only 7 people that radicalized them. They set them up to make America look bad so one day they could confiscate guns. And Betty Friedan was in on it. So the Chicago Seven deliberately lured their followers into situations where they knew they would be hurt or even killed. Because you see, the bloodier things got, according to them, the better for their cause. That's exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King did after being trained by communists at Mount Eagle, Tennessee. There was a conference that was held on April 7th, the year 2000, entitled The Legacy and Future of Hillary Rodham Clinton. It was held at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. Betty Friedan was one of the panelists. She said, and I'm quoting, "Modern feminism has transformed our society for the better," end of quote. She said women had equal degrees with men, equal pay on most levels except mid-level management. She went on to say that equality then broke down at the top ranks. And why was that? She said the gap widened beginning with childbearing years. And the woman could never make it up. So the message she sent was, have no children, women. What could now be holding women back other than motherhood? Her solution, remember communists, they create a problem. Then they advertise it widely. Then they furnish the solution. So the problem is motherhood. Now she's exposing it widely at this forum. Her solution was to create a vast state control, just like in all the other communist countries. Managed daycare system. Babies of only 6 weeks old could be left while their mothers worked alongside the men. This is what's done in every communist country. She said, this is the next step for America. That's communism, socialism. It's coming. When they announce it, it's not long before the legislation begins to enforce it. During this question and answer session, a woman made the following statement. I'm going to paraphrase it for time's sake. Since this great woman's movement to change the face of America started, we've witnessed for 30 years the total deterioration of the American family and the absolute ruination of the American child. Friedan made her point that the skyrocketing divorce rate and the rise in single-parent families was not a bad thing at all. Of course not. She's a communist. The worse things get, the better they are. They represented just more choices for women. And that was a major step in the right direction, according to her. Any child of divorced or separated parents can tell you that the dissolution of a family unit is heartbreaking. It's tragic. It affects them whether they show it openly or not. Inside their mind, it does. But for the radical left communists, their power grows as the family declines. Marx and Engels said the building blocks of the bourgeoisie, the middle class, had to be destroyed. That was the family unit. Wherever communist regimes have taken power, middle-class people have been systematically exterminated by the millions. What did it say in Revelation 13:4? Nobody will be able to stand up against them. That's why they're exterminated by the millions. And it said in verse 7 of Revelation 13 that definitely they're going to make war on the saints because we'll be the only ones that will not give up the family unit. The middle class is the strength of the United States of America, the stabilizing force. It dissolves, the nation dissolves. Left-wing communist strategists have long understood that the bourgeoisie, the middle class, oppose communism. Therefore, the disarming of the bourgeoisie, the middle class in America, has been a long-standing project of the left. So, gun control legislation that violates the Second Amendment to bear arms must be achieved in order to eliminate the middle class. This goal was clearly expressed in the socialist writer H.G. Wells' literature in the 1930s. H.G. Wells believed that mankind was moving inexorably toward a global socialistic government that he called it the New World Order, the same thing that former President George Herbert Walker Bush said in 1990 and 1991. To ensure the success of global socialism, H.G. Wells advised that all potential pockets of resistance be disarmed. Exactly what Betty Friedan said. Divide and conquer is the time-honored tactic of the communist left. In a stable society, it doesn't work. So there must be a breakdown of values. And the breakdown of values begins with the family. So enter Betty Friedan. In a society where men and women are locked in ideological combat, they're in competition, the system breaks down. Energies are then consumed in power struggles between the woman and the man. Infidelities, stepping out on the husband or the wife. Divorce, child custody battles, and finally, in managing the parade of lovers in and out of their homes. Then they have to go to therapists because their mind is all confused. Then the angry bill collectors begin to call them after the divorce to collect their money. This is bad news for the families involved, but it's good news for the communist left. Remember, worse is better when seeking revolutionary change. When you're a frightened, lonely, aging divorcee, or whether you're a soccer mom who fears divorce because everybody around you see their families crumbling. They make better recruits for the communist left than women that are happy, stable, and living with a loving husband and with loving children. The communists said long ago that they would use women without their knowledge to ensure their successful program of overcoming America in their revolutionary cause. The first thing they had to do was break the family down. Then they would rear their children so that there would be no more heroes, no one to stand up against the confiscation of guns. A man by the name of Mike A. Miles of the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice at the University of California, Santa Cruz, reported that school shootings by white children can be traced back as far as 1974. However, 10 times the number can be found among minorities in black and Hispanic neighborhoods over drug dealings. So really, why are they talking about the population out in the suburbs that are killing children? Why? Because it is the bourgeoisie, the middle class of white suburban America that needs to be disarmed. Oh, they can go into the neighborhoods and the ghettos and take the arms anytime they want if they declare martial law, but they just can't go out into the suburbs with people that know there is a Second Amendment to the Constitution. Because of the feminist movement, our boys are growing up without a masculine father figure. There is a masculinity crisis in America, and it's preparing our younger generation to conform to a belief that they are inferior to women. Every nation where this has occurred, lost the art of self-defense for themselves and their nation. The nation was disarmed and subjugated in every case so far. God's law of the family is what leads directly to the destruction of any nation. America is no different just because the Supreme Court declared us a Christian nation. February 29th, 1892, in a 9-0 decision. So, brethren, I have brought to you today a history lesson as to what is happening in this once great Christian country. Why Christianity has been dismantled. Why the family has been dismantled. Why there are no more heroes in America. The men cannot express their masculinity without being male chauvinist pigs. I'm sorry, but there will be a few of us that are going to toe the line. We're going to stand on God's side. We're going to remain faithful. He's going to account some of us worthy to escape all the things that are coming upon this earth. But Jesus told us one thing in Luke 21, verse 28. When these things begin to come to pass, then look up. Lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. Brethren, I implore you to remain a real woman or a real man in God's way, so that the communists will not succeed in destroying us as they're doing the rest of the nation. Happy will you be if you obey God's ways.
John watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then he heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, He looked, and there before him was a white horse. Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Next, John saw a black horse. Then he looked again, and there before him was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. Out from the mountains of brass, or ride with terrible wrath, power was given to them, bringing destruction to man, all through the earth about, east and west, north to south, countries and lands they ride. The world can't hide from the end time. Death, famine, war, and the conqueror plague man. Death, famine, war, and the conqueror tread land. First comes the white horse, conquering and going forth. The red horse making war, takes peace away by force. Hurt not the wine and oil, the black horse causing spoil. Hell follows, death his name, the rider of the 4th pale horseman. War, and the conqueror shall rise. Death, famine, war, and the conqueror shall rise. When the Lamb opened the 5th seal, John saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain as they cried, "Lord, avenge our blood." Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed.
Trip, a time like never before, the coming wrath of the Lord. Earthquakes, the sun becomes dark, like blood and falling stars. Heaven departs like a scroll from him who sits on the throne called the Lamb. God, death, famine, war, and the conqueror shall rise. Turn to God, don't get left behind. Death, famine, war, and the conqueror shall rise. Oh, I plead, come to Christ, don't get left behind.